Welcome to the Positive Money Zoom call. Our topic tonight is COVID-19. How do we pay for it? My name is Cliff Hall. I'm a businessman employing 20 people with a manufacturing plant in Auckland and branches in Christchurch and China. I'm also the Auckland spokesman for Positive Money New Zealand. I'll be posing a series of questions to the founder and national spokesman of Positive Money New Zealand, Don Richards, and I will then later open the discussions up for questions from you, starting with those posted in the chat. To avoid any distracting noises, we have muted everyone, and could you please keep your mics on mute unless you're actually speaking and asking a question later in the program. Note that the call will be taped, so by participating in this Zoom call, you're giving your permission to be recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, you can stop your video and just stay on mute. We expect the call to go on for about 45 minutes. Like I said, tonight we'll be discussing the funding for the COVID-19 stimulus package. What we won't be discussing is the rights or wrongs of the lockdown itself, just how it was funded. Nor will we be discussing conspiracy theories, the New World Order, or the Rothschilds. So, Don, welcome. Can you tell us a bit about Positive Money?
Oh, thanks, Cliff, and everyone, welcome to the call. Positive Money is an advocacy group founded in 2011, and it follows the principles of Positive Money UK that was formed a year prior to that. We believe in a just monetary system that works for society and not against it. We also belong to the International Movement for Monetary Reform, which has 26 organisations similar to ours around the world. And they're dedicated to having a money system that works for us all. Currently, our Reserve Bank issues our notes and coins that make up less than 3% of our money supply, while private banks create the other 97% by ways of loans and mortgages. So that money is our digital currency and is then used for internet banking and EFTPOS transactions. We say the Reserve Bank should issue all of our currency. As private banks make huge profits from money creation, and most of that money disappears overseas, we say with the Reserve Bank issuing our digital currency, any profit from the money creation process will remain in New Zealand for the benefit of all Kiwis.
Hear, hear. So what do you think, Don, of the New Zealand government's approach so far to COVID funding?
Well, I think the wage subsidy is a great idea because that puts money directly in the hands of working New Zealanders. So top marks there. As for financing the package, the idea of the Reserve Bank being used to buy up bonds is a great idea. The mistake is that the money is being used to buy up existing government bonds from financial institutions on the secondary market to provide liquidity for the financial markets. This liquidity can then be used to provide loans. And that's called quantitative easing. And it was used overseas during the 2008 global financial crisis. Quantitative easing actually reinflated the asset bubble, but it did not solve the core problem of too much debt. And at the same time, it increased inequality and poverty. During a crisis, people and businesses are reluctant to take on more debt as they're uncertain about their future and their ability to service additional borrowing. Providing financial institutions with additional liquidity is making loans that no one wants or can afford and is not the way to solve the problem. The government's also underwriting 80% of the loans to businesses, and the banks are still insisting that those taking up the loans put their houses on the line, which goes against the intent of the package. And there's that so-called mortgage holiday being offered by banks. It's far from a holiday. Mortgage holders will still be charged interest, and that payment will be deferred to the end of the term of the mortgage. So the other way the government is funding the stimulus package is to borrow from the banks and financial institutions. This will, however, put great pressure on the government books and will take valuable tax money out of the economy to pay the interest and principal. That money would be better spent rebuilding the economy.
Right, so that's what the government's doing now. What do you think they should do differently?
Excuse me. Well, rather than buy bonds on the secondary market from financial institutions, the direct purchase of government bonds by the Reserve Bank to fund government projects is our preferred option. It's being done to great effect in Japan, China, and Canada. And we can do it here with our Reserve Bank, and it means that the money from the bonds will stay in New Zealand for the benefit of Kiwis.
Are there any examples of this being done before?
Yeah, using central bank money to fund infrastructure projects has been done before in New Zealand. In 1936, the first Labour government instructed the Reserve Bank to provide millions of pounds for the construction of thousands of state houses. This was done during the Great Depression, which had a wider economic impact than the current COVID-19 crisis. It enabled New Zealand to emerge from the Depression sooner and in better shape than most nations. In 3 short years, we returned to relative prosperity and were able to lay the foundation of the welfare state, which became the envy of the world. And the Central Bank of Canada did something similar to this for over 40 years, from 1938. Its funding brought Canada out of the Depression, funded its World War II effort, built highways, public transportation systems, airports, the St. Lawrence Seaway, the universal healthcare system, and the Canada Pension Plan.
Right. So what response has positive money been getting from politicians?
Well, the majority of the politicians we approach are unaware that our Reserve Bank does not create our digital currency. They also consider that borrowing from banks is the only way to make up the shortfall in taxes. The idea of the Reserve Bank providing funding has not occurred to them. We've had some very good conversations, however, with members of the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee and provided them with an oral submission last month on alternative funding methods, which has been well received.
One last pre-prepared question, Dawn. Very important. What would you like participants on this call to do?
Well, that's a good question. Politicians are currently looking for answers, and our solution is to use Reserve Bank money to fund the shortfall in our tax revenue. It has worked in the past, and it will work now. The country needs more people to provide that option to the politicians. We're doing our best, and we and the country need you to spread the word.
Cool. Thanks for that, Dawn. And look, do you want to pause and grab a glass of water or something?
Yeah, I've got a frog in my throat. I think I've got the whole pond in my throat.
That's all right. We're making you do all the work. I'll just, nice shorts too. Now, look, if you guys have any questions, would you please post them in the chat function? I see some of them have started coming through already. We had some questions sent in earlier when we announced a meeting, and those had already been posted online, so we'll start with those. How you doing, Dawn? Are you ready?
I think so.
Okay. We're starting with the questions that were posted online to us earlier.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah. The first question is, can the New Zealand government impose a bank levy on deposits like Cyprus did in 2012, 2013?
Yeah, so some background on that. What happened in Cyprus was the ATMs were closed down and the government took a clip of everyone's, targeted bank accounts over a certain dollar value. Now, in the Cyprus experience, the people who lost the money got to get a stake in the bank. So the money that they had taken from them was returned in the way of a share value in the bank. We have the open bank resolution here, and that actually is a lot more onerous. The banks can force a haircut, that's the terminology used, and they will take money out of depositors' accounts with no shares in the failed banks. Once the open bank resolution kicks in and they take the money, then the government will step in and make up any shortfall. But a positive money solution would make for greater bank stability and depositor protection, because the deposits would be held in the Reserve Bank. So currently we are exposed, but with the positive money solution, banks would be a lot more stable.
Good. Thanks, Don. Yeah, in summary, the answer is yes, I guess, that they could impose just what happened in Greece, but that's already, sorry, in Cyprus, we've already got a regime that's tougher in the open banking resolution.
Yeah, it's already part of the legislation.
Yeah, they slipped that one in without much fanfare. The next question, the present demand for government spending is far in excess of the normal demand for government bonds, so the Reserve Bank will have to buy them. Would you please explain the effective difference between the Reserve Bank buying them, holding them forever with interest returned to the government, and direct government creation of new money that does not have to be repaid?
Well, I think a lot of it is fiscally negative or fiscally equal. So if the government buys bonds at a certain rate from another part of government, that money will return to the government just by a different route. So it is fiscally equal, but there's just a bit more admin required. Direct government creation of money that does not need to be repaid, that's also fiscally neutral. It just depends on how palatable the government wants to make their response, what the public can accept.
Okay, thanks. Next question we have is, why don't we build a stable local currency and let the debt inflate itself away, along with the US dollar and the other currencies linked to that?
Well, we already have a stable currency with the New Zealand dollar. The main problem affecting its stability and value has been the excessive amount created by banks for asset inflation, particularly with housing. Once we put in our positive money solution, that is the Reserve Bank creating our money supply, we will have a very stable currency.
Okay, thanks. Now I'm starting now with the questions that people are starting to enter into the chat.
Right.
The first one is this a funding mechanism that is only appropriate during crisis times or in general as well?
Yeah, good question. It should be used in general. Often it takes a crisis to actually bring in new ideas. And the last time it was implemented was during the Great Depression. But with Canada, they did it for 40 years. And it proved very successful. So this doesn't have to be in a crisis. And the challenge is for us to keep the pressure on the government to make it long-term rather than whenever the system falls over. Stop the system from falling over and you don't have to provide the crisis intervention.
Yeah, fair enough. We want it all the time, not just in a crisis.
Yeah, yep.
The next question here is, are you able to calculate the difference between private versus public funding? I'm assuming that means currently. Isn't that, that would be publicly available information, I would think, wouldn't it?
I have no idea. I wouldn't know. Does anyone know the answer to that?
You talking about them?
If you want to answer.
Go ahead, Lowell. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, of course, the current data is all available on the Reserve Bank website. It's the Debt Management Office from Treasury puts out all of the public funding, and the Reserve Bank has got all the details on the bonds and one thing and the other. And there's heaps and heaps and heaps of stuff on the Reserve Bank website about the money supply and the credit supply. So I'm not sure if that's what the question was about, though.
Yeah, me neither. But perhaps the person who asked that question can ask a follow-up if that wasn't the answer. Thank you for that, Lowell. This is a tough one. Next question here. What are the common features and differences to modern monetary theory, I guess, compared to positive money, sovereign money solution?
Okay, anyone want to answer that apart from me, other than me?
Well, I can answer some parts of it. I mean, obviously we have in common, we both theories believe in public creation of money for the good of society, not just good for the real economy, not just for corporations, etc. That would be one of the things that they have in common. Anybody want to tackle the differences?
Yeah, I would like to tackle the differences. I'm willing to be corrected, but it's my understanding that modern monetary theory only advocates for the Reserve Bank to create money to fund public expenditures, whereas what positive money is proposing is that we end the ability of private banks to create money at all.
Yeah, that's right. So you mean in MMT, you still have both bank creation of money and public creation of money, whereas in sovereign money, you only have public creation of money.
That's right.
Okay, good. Thank you for that.
Can I just jump into, there's also a major difference in that the positive money or sovereign money actually has a finite money supply. Which the neoliberal model does not. And I think that's the biggest difference. No matter who's creating the money, if you don't have a finite money supply, you don't have an economy.
So are you saying that MMT has an infinite money supply and that sovereign money has a limited one, or vice versa?
So I'm saying that positive money has a finite money supply. Now, whether that money supply, that finite supply, can be, you can expand that finite supply as long as it has a direct correlation with the goods and services, the economy.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Ian. I think you're right there. What we say is that the there's a policy arm of the Reserve Bank would dedicate or indicate how much new money could be created in any one year. And that would be the finite amount that would be created. Under MMT, the Reserve Bank could create that money, but then the private banks could create as much as they wanted.
Good. Okay, thanks for that, everybody. Our next question is this approach the same one that the Democrats for Social Credit propose? What are your thoughts on a Reserve Bank digital currency coming into play?
Yeah, very good question. We are very similar to what Social Credit are proposing. So the differences are minor. And what was the second bit about digital currency, Cliff? Sorry.
Let me reread that. Is this approach the same one as social credits? And what are your thoughts on a Reserve Bank digital currency coming into play?
What's the difference between digital currency that the questioner is talking about and digital currency now? Because nearly all the currency is digital now.
Yeah, it's just issued by private banks rather than Reserve Bank.
I think the comment, the question's probably referring to central bank digital currency.
Well, that's simply central bank funding, like we're all talking about, isn't it?
I think it's a little bit different. It's using blockchain instead of reserves, maybe. So maybe the mechanism's a bit different, but you're right. It's all digital at the moment anyways. All right, let me move on to the next question. Oops, okay. Governments these days seem to be fixated on the idea that they should balance their books. But governments are not households and do not, in fact, need to do so. Could you please explain this difference in a way that governments could appreciate?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And we were scrolling through the Hansen report in 1935 when they were talking about the initial Reserve Bank Act that brought in Reserve Bank creating a currency for the creation of the state houses. And they talked about the tyranny of a balanced budget, even back then. The idea of a balanced budget is that you only spend what you get from taxes. And to actually create a surplus means that you are spending less than you get in. So you're actually effectively taking money out of the economy. If through taxes you receive, say, 90 billion and you only spend 80 billion of that, then effectively you're taking $10 billion out of circulation, and you're creating a shortfall. With the system we're proposing, any shortfall in taxes can be made up by creation of sovereign money through the Reserve Bank. So there would be no need for a balanced budget, and you could take on ambitious projects and tackle global warming. You could then start to make real inroads into getting the waterways clean, and we could start to really make a difference in the economy. We're currently constrained by the amount of tax we received, and that comes up and it goes down, and there is always a call for the government to be fiscally responsible. But to be fiscally responsible, I say, is to actually inject as much money as you can into the economy to grow the economy, rather than the sort of static approach we have, only spending what we actually receive in taxes or borrowing, which creates ongoing debt for future generations.
Yeah, can I jump in, Don? I'm just going to jump in here for a second and say that I've just posted a link in the chat. Steve Keen on the Renegade Economist explains this very, very well with a very short video. You might want to check it out later, where he says governments that run surpluses are actually extracting money out of the economy, which is not good.
Could I also butt in, Cliff?
Yes, you can. Go ahead, Robert.
Howell. I mean, this is Keynesian issue. This is Keynesian economic policy, which he established and was implemented in many ways by Roosevelt of the United States in late Depression and Second World War. So I think it's been pretty well established that balancing the books is actually not the appropriate role for a government. In fact, there are a number of economists who argue that balancing the books, as was tried in the early part of the Depression in the United States, actually contributed to it.
Exactly. Thanks very much, Robert. So here's the next question. Here's the next.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Lo, go ahead. Last comment before we move on. Yeah.
No, sorry, but the balanced budget is purely ideological, and and the whole concept that you can't increase taxes. This is the Labor government, all our governments recently. Can't increase taxes on the one hand, you can't borrow on the other. The ideological stance of that is public money or public spending bad, private money and private spending good. So it's 100% ideological.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Thanks, Lowell. The next question, Dawn, is why did Canada stop using this approach? Actually, I think I can answer this. I'm a Canadian, so maybe it's appropriate. The actual answer to that is Canada hasn't stopped using this approach. I think it's been using it as recently as this month. Anyone want to?
There was a pause in it when they wanted to be admitted to the G8. Part of the criteria to join the G8 was that they had to put it to one side. Now, they've since revved it up again, but for some time they then went to borrow, and their overseas debt skyrocketed. But now they've returned back to what they were doing before.
Okay, thanks. Next question. How is positive money different to the monetary approach of Japan since the 1990s? You want to handle that one, Don?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know.
I think Lowell, do you want to tackle that one, Lowell?
Well, very briefly, what Japan has done has swapped government debt for private debt, essentially. So about half of the total money supply in Japan now is in public debt. But of course, so it's not social credit, it's public debt. But because the interest rates are zero over there, it doesn't cost them anything anyway. So there's actually, in some ways, not much difference between social credit and what Japan has done.
Okay, thank you for that. This next question, does that mean that private banks need 100% capital backing for their loans, meaning that they could only provide $1 in loans for every dollar invested with them?
Yes, that's what it means. It's 100% reserve, and there's the big bang approach. It can be done overnight, or there's the graduated approach. Our preference is for the big bang, and there would then need to be some sort of transitional mechanism put in so that the bank money gets converted to sovereign money, and the banks cannot use that money for their profits or anything. It's ring fenced. They don't just get this huge gift of sovereign money overnight.
Okay.
Can I just interrupt? You missed a couple of questions in the chat list. And one of mine was elaborating the question that I asked earlier, which was not, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you,
Robert.
okay.
Yeah.
We're not answering all questions, we're just scrolling through them.
Well, this is a follow-up to the one that really wasn't answered, and because I didn't formulate it properly. If you look at what the stimulus is being proposed for the New Zealand government at the moment, which is basically funding through private credit foundation, and if you compare it to, say, a situation where the government funded that through a public facility such as state advances or the mechanism that used under the first Labor government, has anybody actually calculated the difference? What would actually be the extra amount of money that could actually go into the New Zealand economy if a public facility rather than a private facility was being used?
Thank you for that. I don't really know the answer to this question. I know social credit. I won't actually speak for social credit. I don't know if you want to put your 2 cents in on that, Lowell, or not.
Well, I think that this isn't Lowell talking, but currently I think the private banks are creating in the vicinity of $40 billion a year, or is it 60? Closer to 60, Lowell?
It's about 70 gross and 30 net, something like that.
That's right. It's something like, actually it's even more than 70. It's something like closer to 80 gross, I think, but 70 anyway. And last year was 32 billion net.
So what's the difference between gross and net?
Oh,
What are you talking about?
because as existing loans are repaid,
Oh, okay.
the repayments reduce the money supply, of course, because the debt gets cancelled against the repayments, and then the banks, of course, issue new loans to keep their portfolios growing.
So it's the difference between repayments and total
And new debt
advances. So
yeah.
we're talking 32 billion?
Net new credit creation last year.
Net new 32 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're looking at a figure of about 20 billion for government creation, but that would be something that the Monetary Policy Committee would determine how much new money can be created and put into the economy. So the idea there is that they would then instruct the Reserve Bank to create that much and no more, and then that money would be handed to government, and they would spend that money depending on their fiscal and private policies. So the Monetary Policy Committee would say how much money could be created. That would then be added to tax revenue, and then the banks would, the government would spend it.
And of course,
I'm not quite sure that's what the question was asking.
So,
However, yeah.
but if the government put, as part of its economic stimulus, just for examples, if it decided it was going to put 20 billion in to get the economy going back again, and if it did it through that public mechanism you talked about, it's basically a cost of 20 million. If it did it through the private mechanism, what is it going to cost?
Well, if you put it through the private banks, they would then, and through quantitative easing, what's happened is that they will then try and loan that money out. And if you're in a crisis like the one we're in now, people just won't take on the new money. This is what happened overseas. The banks were left with all this money and no one to lend it to because they didn't have any appetite for taking on new debt. So,
Robert, I wonder if this answers your question. Under the sovereign money solution, you actually create less money than the private sector is currently doing. You don't need so much money because money's not destroyed as it's repaid. It continues to circulate in the economy.
I think also if we look at the what's happening here is essentially at the moment we rent our money from the banks. So and the cost of that rent or that leasing that money from the banks is the interest we pay. So if you are looking at roughly, so let's say 5% as a benchmark. So 5% per annum is what it costs us to lease our money from the bank on an annual basis. So if it's a 20-year loan, it's 20 years times accumulation of 5%. So that's somewhere around 150% of the money. And if we're doing 30 million a year, we're paying back $45 billion a year. So that's what's happening.
Okay, thanks for that, Ian. Look, we've got about 12 minutes left and we've got 24 new messages. So we better jump on to the next one. We're trying to get through as many of these as we can. The question is, Don, could taxes be reduced under your system?
absolutely. Absolutely. This solution can appeal to the left and the right. It doesn't just need or appeal to the left. The government can use the money for whatever purposes it wants, consistent with what they got elected into office. So for the likes of National, they would probably want to provide tax cuts. If it went to the left, they would be looking at increasing benefits or building new housing, that sort of thing. So the quantity of money would be decided by the Monetary Policy Committee, but where it is spent would be up to the government, similar to what they do with our tax revenue.
Okay, thanks. That's good. Kind of moving on. Would it be fair to say that money creation by a government should be based on the I'll start again. Would it be fair to say that money creation by a government should be based on the potential productivity that is available in society? I'd say yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the purpose of the Monetary Policy Committee. We're not trying to fund the financial sector. We're trying to fund the productive economy. You want to add to that, Don?
Yeah, well, the productive economy is where goods and services are produced and bought and sold. But it's also, they could use it for welfare and for infrastructure as well.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here with a number of acronyms in them that I don't understand, so I'll have to skip that one. Sorry. Do you see any bank failures due to COVID-19, and what would be the implications to New Zealand? Big question.
Yeah. I don't think so. I think the government has actually acted very quickly, and they've provided liquidity to the banks. So the banks have plenty of money. They're just not spending it at the moment. So I don't think there'll be bank failures, simply because the government's acted very quickly.
Yeah, I don't think that we see them either. Why did the G8 require Canada to abandon the sovereign money issue?
Because they're dopes.
Because they're orthodox, you mean?
Yeah, they're orthodox. Yeah, they're orthodox neo-liberals. And so, yes, Canada was doing very well with the Central Bank of Canada. It's actually part of the Constitution of Canada that the central bank provides funding to the territories and to the provinces. So it's actually enshrined in law.
Is that right? I better go read my Constitution.
Can I just say something, please?
Fellow Canadian, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's also in the US Constitution that the government shall coin all the money. It's just that it was usurped by the Federal Reserve back in 1913. So you just go and look at the US Constitution, it states it quite clearly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Next question. What do we got? About 7 minutes left. Hi, guys. Would a global or national currency like Bitcoin, for example, with finite supply, stamp out growth? What are the obstacles that prevent politicians adopting the sovereign money issues by the Reserve Bank? That sounds like two questions. So first of all, would a global or national currency like Bitcoin with finite supply stamp out growth? Don?
Well, and it'd be difficult to imagine a global currency. I mean, we did have the
It
American
would stamp
dollar.
out growth.
Okay, it would stamp out growth.
Yeah, I think it would. I mean, the more people are trading, you need more currency to trade with. Otherwise, you get deflation, wouldn't you?
I mean, I'll jump in here. This is to the point. An economy is a balanced beast. So you've got to make sure that the amount of money in the economy at any one time equals the goods and services going around. Now, the difference is, of course, is the time frame. You can invest more now, and you can allow inflation to grow somewhat, and you're going to bank against the productivity of future for future growth to absorb that extra expansion in money. And if it doesn't grow, of course, you have to pay that money back somewhere or destroy it. So that's the real thing. So, and it doesn't matter whether the currency is coins and notes or whether it's a bank balance. And that's what Bitcoin is, just nothing more than an e-currency that we have today. We've had e-currency for years and years and years. Now it's just actually, Bitcoin is actually a private electronic currency. That's the only difference. So,
all right. Thank you, Ian.
Could I just say very quickly, Keynes recommended an international currency, and the IMF and the World Bank were meant to balance the differences between the countries.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Is social credit the same as universal basic income?
Well, I think social credit does advocate for a universal basic income, but it's a very much a subset of it. Social credit stands for a lot of financial, and as a political party, it has opinions on end of life and all sorts of things. So universal basic income is just a very small part of their overall policy.
Here's a good one. What is your strategy to fight the private banks, as the private banks will clearly be against positive money?
I don't think we have a strategy.
I think we do.
All right. Oh, tell me what it is then, Cliff.
Well, here's my strategy anyway. Education. We're trying to inform enough people and get enough people mad at the whole thing that they can't pull the wool over our eyes anymore.
Right. Of course. Yeah, that's our strategy.
Can I say something again, or shall I just go away?
Now, if you don't mind, Jeff, we'll just carry on with the next question. Let's see here. A lot of money balances are hoarded and unused. Should these be taxed away? That's another good question.
Yeah. I think Deirdre touched on velocity of money, and money that's kept in circulation is very good for the economy. So if it gets exchanged for goods and services regularly, then the velocity of money means that not so much money has to be created. If you have money that sits in bank accounts or is used to buy shares or stuck in static velocity, then you will need to create more money. So one way of encouraging people to use their money is to maybe put a tax on money that's being sat on. That's not a positive money solution. We haven't gone that far, but it is something that some monetary people are advocating.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. We've got one here. Do you see a housing connection here in New Zealand, giving the mass unemployment and pending depression? I'm not quite sure what that means. Yeah, I don't quite understand what that means either. A housing connection, maybe referring to the high house prices?
No, that's a housing correction. It's double R, not double N. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that's right. I can't read properly. Yeah. Do you see a housing correction? Mass unemployment and pending depression?
Well, yeah, I do see a housing correction. With people being unwilling to take on debt during the crisis, it will have an impact on people's willingness to go out and buy. So it depends on how long this crisis goes on for and how willing the banks are to lend. If the banks make their criteria stronger, or if people are reluctant to go and buy, given that they can't be sure that they've got a job in 2 weeks' time, then the house prices will come down. We say with positive money, there will be a correction, an adjustment, but it'll be in a managed fashion with the government being able to put in processes and cushion any impact. With COVID-19, we may not have such a managed correction. or the next fiscal crisis, we may not be able to have such a managed correction to the housing stock.
Okay, well, thank you. That's actually all the time we've got for our full session. Dawn, can I hand it to you to close the meeting? And I'm not sure if people want to stay on. We've got quite a few participants, 46 participants on the call today, and I don't know if people want to hang around, but let me hand it back over to you, Dawn.
Okay, yep, thank you very much. And thank you very much for being on the call. It went better than I expected, just once I got rid of that large frog that was permanently resided in my throat. So you're more than welcome to leave the call. If you want to stay on and put in a few more questions, we can stay live for another 10 minutes or so. But those of you who have heard what they wanted to hear, thank you for being on the call.
Excellent. Thanks, Dawn. Or jazz hands as we do in Zoom. Yeah. A couple more questions have come in. How would you tax cash in hand then? It's obviously following on by something that someone said.
Oh, you mean if you're holding on to your money?
I'm not sure what that means. Is Lisa still available? She can unmute herself and say what she means.
Yeah, Lisa's there.
Yeah, hi. Somebody asked the question, like, how do you tax money that wasn't being circulated, you know, to people hoarding it?
Oh, okay.
So I was asking, well, how do you tax, like, because I've got cash sitting at home, not in the bank. How are you going to tax that? Is whether that was relevant.
Well, it would be a lot easier in a digital currency. It would be encrypted, and if you didn't use it within a finite period of time, then it would lose 10% of its value.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
But we can't march into your house and tear up every 10th $100 bill.
No. But cash will be removed from society eventually, though, won't it?
Yeah,
do you think?
Eventually, maybe in 1,000 years, I don't know, but eventually it will. I have a preference to keep cash around, but that's just a preference.
Sweden's going cash-free almost as we speak.
I think that whether the money's cash or not, as long as you have an understanding of what's in circulation, that's the important thing. So it'd be quite easy to look at statistical velocity of money and understand that 5% of all money, for instance, is in savings, cash in hand. In such a case, you just allow for that when you're balancing the economy. You know that some people they'll be moving in and out of the economy, and so the monetary policy would allow for that. So I don't think it's a big issue. Obviously, if you see that the money supply or money in circulation is going down, there's got to be a reason for it. When people are hoarding money, for instance, well then that's when you start to bring in measures to address that.
All right, is Who still in the call? Apparently Who had his hand up, or her hand up.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, you want to ask your question? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm missing something I think is very basic and important. People are talking about money, but what is money? Money is not in circulation in New Zealand according to to Reserve Bank or Banking Act. There are only Reserve Bank notes.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
And
well,
another thing, excuse me, and another thing is
let's deal with your first question, Hugh.
yeah.
You're quite right. The Reserve Bank sometimes has a very narrow view of what money is, and you will see on their website they talked about notes and coins. So when they have Money Week, it's all about how they're minting the notes, minting the coins and printing the notes. They say that the money that is created by the banks isn't actually money at all, it is credit. So the banks create credit, and when that money is spent in the economy, it is then monetarized. So technically, the only people who create money is the Reserve Bank, and that's for the less than 3%, which is notes and coins. But for all intents and purposes, the other 97% is money, because once it's spent into the economy, it becomes monetarized. But you'll have people, economists say, the Reserve Bank does have the exclusive right to print our money or to create our money. So they're only using a very narrow explanation of what money is. They're not going into the 97% that is created by private banks as credit and then monetarized once it's spent.
That's, I'm sorry to interrupt you. That's with a purpose, I believe, because they do not create money. They create worthless piece of paper or digits on the computer. And my next question is, who is really the creditor, principal creditor? Banks have no money, government has no money. Who is the creditor? Banks and government never created nothing, only burden and debts. Who is the creditor, if you can answer this?
I think you've got to understand that our currency is, currency can be anything that we agree holds value to between the person buying and the person selling. So that's what currency is. So in times of old times, that was something like gold. Modern times, that was printed money and coins. Today, they are just bank notes. And those bank notes, it's just a bank note, which is, and that's held on a balance, held on a ledger. So you're right, it's just created out of thin air. But that thin air is something that's recognized between the buyer and the seller and has value. Hence, we deal in debt and not in actual physical money.
So what's the answer on my second question? Who is the creditor? Basically, the only creditor.
The only creditor is really the banks. They don't have to actually produce something that's physical and tangible. All they have to do is produce a promise that the purchaser, which is the person taking on the debt, is willing to pay back. So that's therefore the bank is the principal creditor.
That's in their word, but in basics, you can have on your driveway full of gold. If there are no hands who will pick it up, is just a gravel. So we are the only one who can make something out of something. And what opposite of that, why we can make credits to those bankrupt banks and governments? Are we not the only creditors?
Don, do you want to answer that? One response before we move on?
Yeah, look, I think we've addressed your issues, Hugh, as much as we can. I think we should move on.
Okay, very good.
Okay, sorry to disrupt you.
That's quite all right.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Hugh. I see a question here in the chat. Don, does Positive Money have an opinion about taxing owner-occupied housing since it provides an income, brackets, imputed rent?
No, it doesn't have a policy on that.
Another one. Do you know of any books that I can read that would help me to understand how money creation works and how money flows between the Reserve Bank and the retail banks?
Well, there was a very good paper put out a few years ago by Positive Money, and I think it was called An Introduction to
Sovereign money? Is that the one you're talking
money,
about?
sovereign money and introduction, or words to that effect. I could provide the link to that particular paper. It's very good. It's about 40 pages long, but it provides a very good overview as to how money will be created and the like.
There's quite a few resources on our website, isn't there, Don?
Yeah, there is. Lisa, I see that was you.
It was me. Yeah, I asked
Yeah.
the question. Thank you.
But I'm just wondering how we're going to get modernising money. There we go.
Okay, there is some, Sovereign Money by Professor Joseph Huber, is it? Is that the one you mean?
No, I think it was.
Oh, you said an introduction to sovereign money?
Yeah. Do you
That's
know
a paper, yeah, by Positive Money UK.
I'm just trying to get a way of getting that information through to you, Lisa.
Oh, unless you want to email it, or else I can just look on the website if it's on your website.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Okay, so that's just on the Positive Money website?
It is, yes.
Yeah,
it is.
okay. I'll have a look and I'll look at those others. Thank you for that.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Could I also add John Kenneth Galbraith, Money, where it came from, where it went?
Okay, what was that one again?
John Kenneth Galbraith.
Yep.
Money, where it came from, where it went.
I'm just writing this down. Okay.
Maybe you could type that into the chat. Whoever's
Yeah, I've just
recommending
written
that
it
book.
down. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I've just kind of got my typing going there. That's good. Thank you.
Okay, good. Anything else?
That's all good. Thanks. I asked one question if no one had anything else. I don't know whether it related to it, but I was looking at the, the information that comes around from the Debt Management Office, and they talked about syndicate tap, and I just wanted to know if you guys know what a syndicate tap is.
I have no idea.
Yeah, you don't know. Okay,
Don't know
no,
either.
that's fine. It just comes around, when you get the information from the Debt Management Office.
Yes.
And they talk about their bonds and that they're putting out, and then they had this syndicated tap, and I thought, what on earth is that? And I just thought I'd ask that. So no, that's all fine. It's all good. I didn't know whether it was relevant or not.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we have time for one more, and that takes us to 8 o'clock. Anyone want to ask a question from the floor?
Will you keep the chat available for us to read? Because there are lots of answers and questions and information I would like to have access to and follow up.
That was a bit soft. I didn't quite hear.
I was wondering if we could have the detail from the chat available.
Yeah, someone asked a question on that as well. They've said, can we save the chat? And absolutely, yes, we will. Yeah.
Great.
Well, what we could do is put a link to this particular Zoom call on our website, so you could go and listen to it again.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
Okay. Well, look, thank you very much for your time and your participation. It's like I say, it was our first go at a Zoom call, and I'm heartened by the response that we have. So we're going to have more calls, and the intention is that we will bring in guest speakers as well. So thank you very much for your time, ladies, gentlemen.